Y'all see that movie? This one, I promise I won't take over the mic. Listen, y'all remember that movie, The Patriot, where Mel Gibson was like, no, it was like, nah, King George is horrible. And, you know, he was like, his homie was like, yo, but what about your principles? Because King George was clearly wrong, right? And Mel Gibson's character said, I'm a father. I do not have the luxury of principles. Y'all remember that? He was in essence saying, wars and fighting is bloody, right? So I'm a friend of diplomacy because violence gets real, right? So I 100% believe that we should be able to vote smarter and locally, right? City council, mayor, all of those different things. But when the government is like, we don't care about your votes, you got this guy now, what are you gonna do?
So survival beats diplomacy.
100%.
That's a controversial take, but I love it. Yes. John, what is it that you would like to make sure this audience knows about their rights when it comes to ... You actually have a presentation there.
Do y'all have Dr. John, do you have his books? I got like 4 signed copies. Yeah.
I guess I owe you a dinner. But anyway, so I'm a little bit different from these guys. I'm an economist. I do numbers all the time on things. So that's kind of my approach. And so I just want to talk first of all about who benefits the most from being able to have guns for protection. And they're basically 2 groups of people. People who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. You know, the thing is, you see women who are being stalked or threatened. What's the advice that they're given? They're given so much advice that they're supposed to completely change their lives. You know, go and get a new job, move in with somebody else. If you're going to go to work, take a different route to work each day. You know, sometimes they're given advice like you go and you take a martial arts class. The one thing that they're never told in any of these women's groups, which are trying to help them, is to go and get a gun, which is by far the safest course of action for them to be able to take. You know, often we'll hear claims that people should behave passively when they're confronted by a criminal. And that's actually very dangerous advice on average. It's true, there's a kernel of truth to it, but it's very misleading. But if you look at all forms of active resistance lumped together, you compare it to passive behavior. Passive behavior is slightly safer. The problem is they're lumping all those things together. Some of them are much more dangerous than passive behavior, and some are safer. So for example, for a woman, by far the most dangerous course of action for a woman to take when she's confronted by a criminal is to use her fist. Because you're almost always talking about a young male attacker in that case, and a large strength difference. And for a woman to go and use her fist is going to result in a physical response back and serious injury. The second most dangerous course of action for a woman to take is to try to run away. Now, if she can run away and escape, that's great. But the problem is that women tend to be relatively slower runners on average than their attackers. And in the process of being tackled and subdued, they're very likely to end up being seriously injured. What you find when you look at all these different types of things, and there's something called the National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys about 240,000 people a year where we get this data from. People who have been victims of violent crime to find how they respond, whether they end up getting injured. By far, the safest course of action is to have a gun. Women who behave passively are about 2.4 times more likely to end up being seriously injured than a woman who has a gun. Now, the other group of people who benefit the most from having guns are basically poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas. They're overwhelmingly the major victims of violent crime. We've heard about police here earlier. If the police could be there all the time, that's great. But even fast response times, even assuming that you're able to go and make a call, not everybody can go and tell the criminal, please wait for a couple minutes, I'm going to call 911 before they go and attack you. You know, a very fast response time may be 7 or 8 minutes. If you're in a place like New Orleans right now, the response time for emergencies is 36 minutes. So, but even 7 or 8 minutes may make the difference between life and death for someone. Right now, there's about 22.5 million people with concealed carry permits. This varies dramatically across states in the United States in terms of how difficult it is to get it. You have states like Alabama, where 28% of the adult population has a permit. Indiana, it's 23%. On the other extreme, you have places like New Jersey and Hawaii, where it's 0.02%. As of last year, though, with the Supreme Court's Bruin decision, we've begun to see some real increases in some of these places. Basically, beforehand, you had 7 states, which were so-called may-issue states, where you had to go and explain to some public official why you should be able to go and defend yourself. And, interestingly, you have Democrats who go and claim that they care about the poor, that they care about minorities, they care about women. What you find is that in those states where you had to go and convince a public official, those were not the people they gave the permits to. The people that they gave a permit to in those places would be wealthy, politically connected white men, usually. So I had some data from Los Angeles County a few years ago when they had the May issue rules, and they had given out 341 concealed carry permits to an adult population of 8.5 million people. What we found is only 7% of the permit holders were women, only 5% were blacks, only 6% were Hispanics. Is it just that in Los Angeles County, women aren't victims of stalking and violent crime? Nationwide, about 1/3 of concealed carry permit holders are women, but only 7% in Los Angeles County. Nationwide, about 13% of permit holders are black, but only 5% in Los Angeles County. These are areas where it's overwhelmingly controlled by Democrats. And yet, when they go and get good reasons, for some reason, the only people that they think, and similar in New York City, who have good reasons are basically people who make large donations to their campaigns. We have 29 constitutional carry states now. These are states where it's not even necessary to have a permit. So I said there's 22.5 million people with permits, but you have a lot more people who are carrying. We did a survey last year, about 15.6% of likely voters carry all or most of the time. And a lot of that is in these light green states here where people don't need it. And one of the reasons why we've had so many states over the last few years move to constitutional carry is that during COVID, you had 21 states that just stopped issuing permits. So you had a situation where violent crime was increasing. People wanted to be able to get a gun for protection. And yet, this system shut down, and they weren't giving out the permits. With constitutional carry, if a woman's being stalked, she no longer needs to wait 90 days to be able to go and be able to carry legally. She can immediately do it. She may not have 90 days or 60 days to be able to go and make a difference for whether she can carry. And here are the states by the percent with concealed carry permits. You can see the dark blue are the ones where it's over 15% of the adult population with a permit. And then you have the light blue, which is about 10 to 15%, and then the direct green, which is 5 to 10%, and so on. The heavily Democratic states, generally, New Jersey, New York, California, have very low rates. Now, so, we've had this big increase in violent crime over the last few years. My next lecture this afternoon will go through the data a lot more on that. But the causes, I think, are pretty simple. Okay, it's not rocket science. You look at a lot of these cities in 2020 slashed police budgets. New York City cut its police budget by $1 billion a year. Los Angeles cut it by $150 million. Washington, D.C. by $15 million. San Francisco by $120 million. Places like Chicago cut the number of police officers by 400 positions that they had there. And this is at the same time we're having huge increases in inflation. So the real cuts, even if they kept the budget the same, were much larger. We see district attorneys around the country refusing to prosecute violent criminals or lowering the charges that they have. You have large percentages of inmates that were released from jails, even up through 2022. You know, the people that you have in jail are basically 18 to low 30s. These are not people who are over 65 who are actually at risk for things like COVID. But even well into 2022, you were having liberal judges across the country releasing, in many cases, half or even 2/3 of the inmates from local jails. And then, of course, you have bail reform. Just mention this quickly. You know, I can give you cases. There's a recent case in Detroit where a man had killed 3 people. He was released on $10,000 bail. He then went to took $1,000 for it. He then killed somebody else, an ex-girlfriend, when he got out. He essentially had a free murder that was occurring there. You're already taking away 3 life sentences. You say, well, I'll take away his 4th life. That will stop. Or you look at something like the Nashville school shooter last year. Tennessee had a law that was a 6-year prison sentence if you violate the gun-free school zone that's there. For you or I, that's a huge penalty. Our lives would be completely changed by 6 years. But let's say you're the murderer who murdered 6 people in that case, okay? And we're facing 6 life sentences or 6 death penalties. You think another 6 years from their 7th life, they'd say, I could live with 6 life sentences, but you take 6 years from my 7th life, that will stop me from doing it. What you've done with many of these penalties is that the law-abiding good citizens obey these rules, because it's a real penalty for them. And the murderer, in that case, assuming that they have lived, takes advantage of that. The reason why these gun-free zones are magnets for these killers is because they know they'll be the only person there with a gun. So, you know, what you can do is you can let individuals defend themselves to make it costly for criminals to commit crime, or you can go do I just want to show you how law enforcement's collapsed in this country. These are the arrest rates for violent crimes, reported violent crimes. The first set of graphs are year by year for all cities, and then the second set is for cities over a million. There's basically 9 cities that you can probably guess are there. The arrest rate for violent crimes, these are reported violent crimes, in the 5 years before COVID was about 44%. It started falling in 2020. The FBI didn't report the data for 2021, but in 2022 it was down to 20%. It's over a 50% drop in arrests for violent crime. Is it surprising then that if you look at something like the National Crime Victimization Survey, between 2021 and 2022, you saw a 42% increase in violent crime? And just, you know, the reason why it's important for people to be able to protect themselves, it's not just the direct victims of violent crime, which are harmed. You know, businesses close. The thing is, and I wish I had time to go through this, I'll just take another minute. Crime occurs in very concentrated areas in this country. You have 56% of the murders in the United States taking place in 2% of the counties. You have, even within those 2% of the counties, almost 2/3 of their murders occur within 10-block areas within those counties. Who do you think lives in those areas? It's basically poor minorities, poor blacks. Who do you think the victims are? But it's not just the direct victims. The businesses close in those areas. Who disproportionately owns the businesses in those areas? Who works in those stores? Who shops in those stores that get closed down? Who owns the homes in those areas whose property values are depressed because of the higher crime rates that are there? Those are the victims in many different ways. Their life savings that may be tied up in their homes are depressed because of that. And I can go on, but I know I've kind of run out of time. Anyway, there are lots of other things that I can go and talk about, but I greatly appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, John. So to make sure we have time for it, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience. If you want to come up to this microphone, and if you have any questions, we'll try to get to as many as possible. And I'm sure even after we run out of time, If you have questions for any of the individual panel members, they'll be happy to answer them. While we're waiting for people to come up, I will do the devil's advocate thing for you as well, John. You say that one of the best ways that someone can defend themselves against violent crime is to have a gun, and yet we see that there are more guns with each day than ever before in America. The gun-to-person ratio is continuing to rise. We've long ago reached an inversion point where there are more guns than people in America. And we see that there's been a long-term, multi-decade trend of the murder rate dropping. And in the areas that have the most guns per people and the least restrictions, we see oh no, I guess you're right. Oh, never mind. Sorry. That's all right, everyone. No, John was right. So with that, we will take the first question, please. Hi.
Hello, hi, my name is Walsh. I'm sorry. My first question actually is to you because I wanted you just rattled off some numbers, some statistics. More guns than people in America. How many of those guns are owned by actual military, police forces, and so forth?
Oh, I honestly don't know. I do know that civilian gun ownership is extremely high. There's no parallel to any other country on earth.
Okay.
Is there none?
Well, I mean, you have to distinguish between gun ownership and gun possession. In terms of gun ownership, we're the highest, but in terms of gun possession, there seems to me to be a more important measure. You look at countries like Switzerland, where able-bodied males between the ages of 18 and 34 used to be required to go and have a machine gun in their home, in many cases a handgun, and then after 34 they could remain in there. The government technically owned the guns, but if you were to go and count possessed guns there, they have a gun possession rate that's probably about 40% higher than the rate that's in the United States. If you look at Israel, the government technically owns virtually all the guns that are in the country there. Only about 7% of the guns that are in the country are actually owned by the civilians. But you go and apply, and the government will give you a gun, but they technically still own it, and they have it for 50 years.
Right.
But if you include, to me, possession seems a lot more important than actual ownership that's there. Because you're talking about impact on crime, and they would probably also have had about 40% higher rate too.
And you had other questions as well?
Yes, and I had a question about probable cause. What exactly equates to probable cause?
That's a fantastic question, and I wish judges understood it better because they seem to apply it differently when the potential criminal is someone, a peasant like the rest of us, or somebody with political connections. So probable cause technically means more likely than not, that there is, at least some substantial chance that this individual did, commit a criminal act. But in practice, it often is up to judges to make that determination, and it gets squishy. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you on that, but
So what I hear is it's up to the judge.
it's up to the judge. And one of the things I could have mentioned earlier is knowing our rights. We have defensive rights against the government. We also kind of have offensive rights against the government as well. No person is above the law, and certainly the government is charging plenty of people in government with crimes right now. So get in on the fun. If there's somebody, you believe a politician has violated the law, you can seek a warrant against them in pretty much every state. And that's where it is very interesting, because when I've had clients who are doing that, I have one client right now who is seeking a criminal arrest warrant against the Secretary of State for violating Georgia law, which he clearly did according to the rules. And the judges are really having a hard time with the probable cause determination in that one.
And my last comment is about something that you said about control, I believe it was. And what I would like to say is, in order to control you, you must first buy into the thought that the other has the authorization to do so. So I'd like to put that out there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having this conversation. taking this on. My name is Michael Haas. And I want to ask a question for each of the members of the panel and also for you, Spike. Since 1999, there has been a large growth of red flag laws throughout the nation, currently in 18 states and Washington, D.C. Each time that we've seen this move forward, we've been promised that it would protect us from suicides and from mass shootings in particular, and school shootings in general. And we currently have H.R. 3018 that is trying to get pushed through in the United States Congress right now. So far, we found that of 4 studies that have been done about red flag laws, only one says that there might, kind of, sort of, red flags might reduce the number of suicides, has no impact on mass shootings. Meanwhile, well over 20,000 Americans have lost their right for the Second Amendment. They've lost their families, something that no one tells them what red flags do. They take away your children. Given this information, given some of these details, and I understand there's more details, I invite everyone to check it out for themselves. I have studies, but I know we from the panel have as well. I'd like to hear, what do you guys think of the red flag laws? What do you agree or disagree? And also, what would you advise others?
I'll let the panelists answer first.
Well, we've done a lot of research on this at the Crime Prevention Research Center. So, here's the thing. There's already much better laws on the books that protect people's rights. And these are called, it goes by various names, civil commitment laws, called like the Baker Act in Florida. But all 50 states have had these laws for well over 50 years. If you're concerned about somebody, you call the police. If the police think that there's a reasonable chance, which is like a 20% chance that somebody's a danger to themselves or others, they can take them for a psychiatric evaluation. If the psychiatric, and it depends on the state, either 2 or 3 usually, psychiatric experts, and if they agree that there's a reasonable chance that it can be immediate hearing, if you can't afford a lawyer, we'll provide for you in that case, that hearing where evidence is cross-examined. And then if the judge, it depends, whether the judge thinks it's likely or has maybe a higher standard for doing, then the judge has a wide range of options. What the judge can do in that case, he can go and say, if you're going to voluntarily go and see a mental health care professional, we'll have you come back in a week or 2 and we'll reevaluate. Or the judge can take away your driver's license if he's worried about you driving a car through other people. Or he can take away your guns. Or in the most extreme case, you can civilly commit you. The difference between that and the red flag laws that you're talking about is red flag laws is somebody makes a written complaint. That's all the judge has. The judge doesn't talk to the person who made the complaint, doesn't talk to the person that the complaint is made about. And maybe within a month, depending upon the state, there'll be a hearing. But if you can't afford a lawyer, one's not provided for you. I've talked to lawyers involved in the process, and you're talking about often $10,000 or so. So, that's as I can tell, the vast majority of people who go through this process don't even get a lawyer. Because they say the only thing that happens with a red flag law is they take away your gun, okay? So I may want to keep my guns, but is it worth $10,000 to me when the only thing that happens to me is that they temporarily take away your gun? So you have no representation that there's a lawyer on the other side, the prosecutor who's going to be doing this. So people who go in there and represent themselves, as I'm sure our lawyer here can go and say, are at a huge disadvantage. But, the thing is, you bring up excellent questions about impact on suicide, what have you. Our research that we published on this doesn't show any impact on total suicide. The thing is, there's so many different ways for people to commit suicide. I'll give you just some general evidence on this. There are places around the world that people, they have all guns or all handguns. Has there been drops in firearm suicide? Yeah, there have been some drops in firearm suicide. But the thing is, you can't find one place where they banned either all guns or all handguns and total suicides have dropped. They remain the same. Because there's so many close substitutes in different ways for people to go and commit suicide that are there. And, there's so many different ways that people can go and harm other people. If you're really concerned about that, let alone getting a gun illegally or what have you, simply taking away their guns. And the thing is, if you're really concerned about somebody having problems, wanting to go and commit suicide is simply taking away their guns, not providing them with any mental health care there. But the gun control people want you to think if we just take away people's guns, that will solve the problem. Anyway, I'm sorry for what I said, but it's just.
Did either of the other panelists want to weigh in on red flag laws?
Nothing to add other than I think the point about having to hire a lawyer to go up against the government's lawyer is a very good one. Will be at a disadvantage without a lawyer and a government provided lawyer. I mean, I'm a public defender, I do government work, but relying on the same entity that is prosecuting you for your defense is a chancy business. So I think John has identified some really serious problems with red flag laws, and thank you for bringing it up.
I don't fuck with red flag laws.
That's pretty much my answer. I will extend that to say the red flag laws are legalized swatting. There's basically no due process. Good luck ever getting your gun back. And the study you cited, there was one state, I forget which it was, that said that they believed that they saw, I think, a 20% reduction in gun suicides. There was no reduction in homicides of any kind, including gun homicides, and there was no reduction in suicides. In other words, they found another way to kill themselves. But the bottom line is, the fact that the old way of taking someone's guns if they were an exigent threat requires due process is not the reason to remove due process, and that's what red flag laws do. And we should not be taking the guns first and due process later. We should be using due process. That's a punishment to take something from someone. Thank you for asking that.
I'd love to talk more about those other people, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like John to respond to the pushback on the sharper causes of crime, where the decrease in the funding of police correlated to the increase in crime. But I think there's a lot of people that would see that it really is about the priorities of what the police are doing, because they always have funding to enforce laws against no substances or COVID restrictions or something like that. So to me, it's not that they're lack funding, it's what they prioritize.
Right. Well, I mean, surely there's things that we can have the police concentrate on where people are really being victims of crime. But there are a lot of fewer police, and you've also lost a lot of police experience. You've had a lot of retirements for police. I know in the last year or so, you've maybe had going back and trying to hire people that are there. But, you have somebody who's been on the job for 6 months or a year, they're not going to be able to replace somebody who had 15 years of experience that retired early because of some of the changes. Plus, they've done other things that are there. In Chicago, every time a police officer goes and talks to somebody, they have to fill out 2 legal pages of forms about who they talk to them, why they talk to them, what they talk to them about, which takes on average about an hour for them to do. You go talk to 4 people in the morning, your afternoon is filled up with paperwork. California, you pull over a driver now, you have to go and, particularly if you give them a ticket, you have to go and fill out forms that can take 40 to 45 minutes for you to do. Bizarre questions out there. They ask them things like, what was the sexual orientation of the person that you pulled over? But you're not allowed to ask the person, you have to guess what their sexual orientation was in California. And so, you've effectively reduced the number of police officers dramatically. In California, there's a lot of evidence that police officers just aren't stopping people for traffic violations that are there because they don't want to have to do all the paperwork. Of course, as economists, I'd say if the risks of getting caught for traffic violations are reduced, what do you think is going to happen to the rate of people speeding or run through stoplights? And what's going to happen to the accidents that are there? So, do I agree with you that we should concentrate on certain types of crimes? That, yeah, sure, okay. But I also think that we reduce the number of police. In a lot of places in this country, if you call in now, and they'll ask you if it's an emergency, which means literally, is the criminal there committing the crime? And if the criminal's not there literally committing the crime at that point, they will no longer send a police car out. if you have a crime report, you have to go into the police station now in order to fill that out. And, so I showed you the drop in arrest rates that are there. Over 50% drop in arrest rates for large cities. That's a big part of it. Because what's happened is that people are less likely now to report crimes to the police. We've known for a long time the rate that people report crimes to the police depends a lot on whether you think anything's going to happen, whether people are going to be caught and punished. And so what's happened is that's a 50% drop in arrests for reported violent crimes. If you look at for all violent crimes, reported and non-reported, for those large cities, only 8% of violent crimes result in arrest, and only 1% of property crimes result in arrest. And just because somebody's arrested doesn't mean that they're going to be charged, doesn't mean that they're going to be prosecuted, or let alone convicted for that type of thing. So in many places in this country, the risks for criminals committing crime are non-existent. And so, it makes it even more important that people be able to protect themselves.
Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want to jump in on that. I'm personally not impacted in my community. Most of the data that John is talking about is in the community that I live in, right? Philly. I'm not concerned about the police. I would rather the police not be in my community. I was arrested for doing Tom Woods' podcast. Seriously. That's why I got a gun charge. So, in my community, I'm fine with the police not being there. In exchange for that, unless we call you, right? In exchange for that, everybody should have a gun. And if you come into our community with violence, actual crime, I want to be clear, actual crime. I do a thing that creates a victim. I violate your house, your highest property, your body, right? And then I think that person should get shot. We don't have to complicate this, right? So what's happening is on one hand, you're letting violent criminals out from jail. Then you're saying, oh, but your community is also not gonna have access to firearms. And then you're saying the few people that are like, okay, I want to follow the rules, are gonna well, I gotta call the police. Average response time nationally is 7 to 8 minutes, right? So again, I think to your point, the clear distinction is the police don't do very well in my community. So for my community, we don't want you here. If we call you, there's not trucks riding around like fire trucks. Where's the fires at? You setting the fire, man? That's not how that goes. So I think there's a balance there that has to be clarified a little bit better. I don't know, how many people would be okay in the community that you live in, unless you're really rich in the room? If you're really rich in the room, you probably live in a gated community. So I'm not talking to you, all right? But how many people would be okay if there were just the Second Amendment? You could have a firearm, and you could use that firearm to defend yourself against violent criminals, and the police didn't show up unless you called them. Show of hands, how many people would be okay with that? Okay, is that most of the room? Why is that not the case? Well, if this is a sample size, right? Respectfully, because this is not a sample size, we're chugging on point, right? If this is the case, then if most people that you ask, if you think that would be the case, then why is that not the case?
Because our revenue agents.
Because it's a jobs program. Catherine, did you have thoughts on that, or?
Well, my thoughts came up after Naj's first comment, because
Microphone.
we really are in a little bit of
Microphone.
Sorry about that, y'all. We are in a little bit of an awkward situation when it comes to defending our rights, because if you're in a voluntary interaction with the police and you want to walk away and they say, no, you can't walk away, what happens next? But I am here to say that in Georgia, at least, you are entitled to defend against an unlawful arrest with any level of force necessary, up to and including deadly. And that's tough to think about, for the people in this room. Well, see, Maj is helping us. Maj is helping us out here. But these are the questions that we're going to have to confront about, what does it mean to have agents of the government who are allegedly serving us in our communities, and what do those budget cuts mean? And I think those are conversations we need to be having with our friends and other folks in our community. And thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. So we have 2 minutes left. So for this question, if both the questioner and the panelists can limit to what they're about to say to something that would fit on a large bumper sticker, I would appreciate it. So everyone gets their piece of the 2 minutes.
This is going to be very small type on the bumper sticker.
Okay.
I'm the canary in the coal mine. I live in a country of 40 million people. It brings in about 1 million people per year, 2.5% of our population. If I misspeak about your gender, if I misspeak about your age, if I misspeak about melatonin levels, I go to jail under hate speech legislation. I don't have a First Amendment. I don't have a Second Amendment. I don't have a Constitution. What do you recommend for us dumb Canucks?
I mean, you could use your vote. You moved to the US, we could use your vote.
We live on a continent. The line is not a border in the sand, it's a border in the mind. You have an attitude of rights. We don't. How do you change that?
Well, rights don't come from government, they come from a higher source, but they are up to us to protect. And if you can't develop a culture of rights within your fellow humans, you know, it's tough. They say 250 years is about how long the republic can last, and we just celebrated our 248th birthday here in the United States. So I think developing the culture of liberty is why we're all here at FreedomFest. You know, having those conversations, doing the work here, and taking it back to our communities.
Thank you. And then, Maj, if you want to give your thoughts on it.
I was just going to say, we're in danger enough here of losing what we have, even what you're saying. So maybe you should move here again.
Trust no one but Chico.
Thank you guys so much for being a part of this, and stay tuned.